Today's lecture is Eugen. Eugen, are you here?
Yes, I'm with you. Can we
Okay.
start? Okay, hello everybody, good evening, and please put a plus in the chat if you can hear me and if you can see my screen. Great, I see a lot of pluses. So let's get started. Well, today we are going to cover two very interesting, I would say, a bit complicated topics. It's semantic and CSS. If to be more specific, maybe CSS3 properties. But before we started, I a bit extended our current lecture with some topics that I suppose will be helpful for you and will very interesting for you and help you to complete your home tasks with maybe a bit higher level. So, and today we start with CSS box model. And before, as you remember, this icon means that this slide contain a link to useful information. So as you can see in the chat, I shared a link to our presentation, and if you open it, you can click this icon and check a useful information. Well, box model. Box model, it's a definition, it's a behavior that explain to us how content takes space on a page. So if we take a look on this picture, you can see that in the center of this big circle is content. After that, you can see information that content has paddings. It's a padding left, top, right, and bottom. After padding goes border. And after border goes margin. And this is 4 things that box model includes. Content, it's just a content. It's a box that include content inside. Doesn't matter what kind of content. It can be text, it can be image, and the other things. Padding. Padding, it's a space between. I turn back. It's a space between content and border. After that goes not box area, I would say margin area. Margin area, it's a space between padding and margin. And you should understand that content include content box, padding box, and border box. It's all circles, not circles, squares, not squares. I forgot. Anyway, this is the size of your content by default. What does it mean? It means if you want to add any size, for instance, width or height for your content, and you set up, for instance, 100, it doesn't mean that your content will take 100 pixels. Because when you add these properties, in this size will be included paddings and border. To manipulate with the box sizes exists a special property, box sizing. It has values as a content box. It's by default border box. When you add this property, it means that your content will be include padding size and border size. And the last, it's a padding box. It's mean just only paddings. So if you add 100 pixels as a size, your square will be a bit bigger. It takes plus 5 pixels of border and 10 pixels of padding. But if you add property border box, it means that your square will be 100 pixels, including paddings and borders. And this is the real size. So don't forget about this property and add it to your elements when you want to add size to it. Because usually some developers forget about this property. They add some sizes, but then they don't understand why the box tags take a bit more space that they set. It's the first topic. The second topic is positioning. Position is very useful, it's a very common feature. I would say each front-end developer uses it a lot. So exist 5 types of positioning. On this slide you can see just 4, but a bit later I will talk about one more type of position. Okay, by default goes static position. Static position, it doesn't mean anything. It's just set up by browser, and when your element has such type of positioning, you can't move it, and it just take place when it appear in a flow. I suppose you should remember about the document flow. We talk about this at our previous lesson. The next type is fixed. When you set fixed position for your elements, these elements start to positioning from your window. Again, a bit later, I will show you practical example and I will show you this behavior. Relative. When you set up relative position for element, it still take its place. But if you add, for instance, left property for it or bottom property, it starts to move. But on his old place, this place will be safe. So it means that it place will be empty. In CSS, we call it's like element shadow. And absolute, so this element became its create a new flow, and again you can position this element, and this element can be positioned by the parent element with another position property, as for example relative or absolute, but not a window, I don't know, but not a window, just a window. So to define the position and understand based on what element will be positioned element is very simple. If we add position absolute, we have two options. If parent element has position static, it's default position. So in this case, element with absolute positioning will be positioned by body. Another case when parent element has position like relative, absolute, and fixed. In this case, element with position absolute will be positioned by its parent. And practical examples. In this presentation will be such windows. It's with these windows you can manipulate. You just need to click this one. It's a code pad CodePen frame, and you will be redirected to the page. And with this page, you can manipulate. So you every type of position you can try by yourself. So static position, nothing changed. You have 3 boxes with the static position. As you can see, each of these boxes don't has such property because it's a property by default. So just default behavior. The next is position relative. So again, we have 2 boxes, but these boxes at the bottom at the right. And if we take a look in the CSS, here is this. We have a box. It's a class for both boxes, and it has the position relative. And after that, we change top and left for each element. For instance, for another one, we have left 400. If we open CodePen and try it by ourselves, for instance, we can comment to remove this property to take a look where this element positioned by default. So here is the place for box 1 and box 2. Okay. And now we can add everything what we want. For instance, I don't know, right 100 pixel. And here is the result. From the old position, we move to the right at 100 pixel, or minus 100. Negative, it's okay property. And the bottom. So here it is. Next type of position. Can I remove it? Yes, it's an absolute. As I said, absolute positioning, when you add this property for element, this element creates a new flow. New flow means that our current page has 2 flows, 2 document flow. First flow, it's a flow for content. It's for, in our case, it's for paragraph. Another flow, it's for position elements. Okay, let's again open CodePen to understand it. It's maybe more clear like here. Yes. As you can see, when I scroll our document, our boxes move with it, but these boxes is outside of the normal flow. If we remove position absolute to take a look where this element are positioned, they at the bottom, all of them. And as you can see, here we have a lot of space, empty space, which this box it is taking. But if we again uncommented our property, as you can see, we don't have this space. We just have a space which our paragraph takes. It means that our paragraph, as I said, takes 1 flow, and our boxes, which are positioned, takes another flow. And fixed. Fixed, I would say it's very familiar with absolute with a minor difference. When you add fixed type for element, here we have two types, fixed for gray and absolute for blue. Fixed element always positioned with the window, with your window. Absolute position based on parent element if it has any positions like, again, absolute, relative, and here is the behavior. As you can see, our fixed element always in the top left corner, our absolute position based on our content. So this element always be here. We can change its position, but again, if it will be, our position will be based on window. And here is the difference between fixed and absolute. And the last type of positioning, it's sticky. Sticky, it's a bit tricky type of position because I show you the behavior when we start to scroll. Here is the behavior. So at the beginning, it's like a normal element, but when we scroll to the very top, it's became a sticky. And again, it's very useful, but why I didn't include it in our base table, that because this is, I would say, a very old property, but unfortunately, not all browsers support this property. That's why such behavior usually we implement using JavaScript. In a Chrome, it's okay, so it works correctly. And very common case of using position sticky, it's global navigation, and this navigation will be always visible on your page and never scroll. Okay, also when we talk about positioning, about creation of new flow, we should understand one small thing. It's that index. Flow, it's a normal document visibility. When you create new flow, it means that this flow will be two flows, doesn't connect to, I would say, layouts, doesn't connect to each other. And in this case, we need position to show which element will be on the top. For instance, on this picture, you can imagine it's like a 3D. If you turn it on 90 degree, you will see that green square is on the bottom, but here the pink with absolute, that index 2, it's on the top. So it's look like two lines, for instance, and here first line will be the green at the bottom, and on high level will be that index. So it's like 3D of displaying. Our next example is I'll show you this again on the code pen. Okay, as you can see, we have an orange circle, and this orange circle has that index -1. And as you can see, content at the top. If we change our property, for instance, to 1, you see what happens? Our circle became at the top. And here is the positioning. Here is the connection between positioning and layouts. I would say 3D. You need, when you add such properties, for instance, float or position absolute, position fixed, you need to understand that this element creates a new flow, and you need to manipulate with two flows and shows what flow will take space at the top, for instance, like this. And again, -1, text at the top. Okay. And the last topic before we start talking about semantic and CSS3, it's a float. I would say float, it's a very old technology, and currently we try to not use it because, as I said, it's very old, but again, it's very useful because all browsers support Flow, and Flow still can create a lot of things, but now in most cases we use Flow Flexbox. But about Flow, you need to know. So when you want to create maybe a couple words about history. So as you can see, I added here a lot of links to read about Flow because it's, I would say, a bit tricky topic. Firstly, Flow appears when developers want to create such things. For instance, they want to insert image and add a text which float this image. And only for this goal was created property float. Float left, float right. It shows from what kind of size will be floating. For instance, if we change our image from float left to float right, this image will be here. So we show that image float text from the right. But a bit later, developers start to use this feature for creation layout. And when they want to create layout, for instance, 2 columns layout or 3 columns layout, they start to apply such technologies. So they add float for one box, for another box, for instance, for this right, float left, for this float right, and create such site. As you can see, it's a very common structure. Header at the top, footer at the bottom, and between header and footer, we have a main content and 3 columns for content. And this brings to us some difficulties because float has some tricky behavior. But first, a couple things that you should know about the float. That when you add a float, it means that your object must have a width. For instance, all float elements, when you add a float right, float left, doesn't matter, they behave like a block. It doesn't mean inline or inline block. They turn around into block. And when you add a flow, again, these elements drop out of the normal flow. They create the inner flow. That's why it's difficult to manipulate with a couple layouts when you add a couple properties, for instance, float left and float right. And one of the tricky behavior, it's collapsing. What does it mean? Firstly, take a look on this markup. We have a container and we have 3 images. 3 images, it's here, elements, and our container, as you can see, it's a dark gray, I don't know, a dark gray canvas, such thing. And why it happens? Why our parent doesn't wrap our elements? It happened because it collapsed. It happened because we add a property flow for our image. Here it is. And each of these image create itself flow. And our parent it can to see another element. So it doesn't contain anything now. That's why it collapsed, because each of image create those personal flow. And to fix this issue was created another property. It's a clear. And here the property that we can use, it's a left, right, and both. By default, it's a clear none. So we don't have a clearing flow by default. And here is the 3 solutions how we can fix the issue with collapsing parent. First, it's just to add property clear, but take a look how we do this. First, we have a parent element. Inside this parent element, we have a block with a float. And after that, we add empty div. And this approach exists, but the main problem is that we add empty element in our markup. As you can see, div doesn't contain any information. It's just a contain class. And for this class, we add the property. And this is bad. After that, when appears save the elements, the same technique, but in this case, we don't have empty element. We use the save the element after. And for this element, we use 3 properties. It's content, because when you add after, you always should a property content. After this, display. In this case, display can be block, for instance, not always table. And the last property, clear, with the value both. So this structure has a name clear fix, and usually each project which contain float elements for creation layout has such class, and usually this class has a name clear fix and such 3 properties. These properties can be extended by 5, but now it's absolutely valid and absolutely working construction with the 3 properties. And the last approach, it's for Internet Explorer. I am not sure that this information is actual for now, because Internet Explorer is now it's not supporting, it's not very useful browser, but again, it depends on the project. So in this case, we can use property zoom and display for a parent element, or for instance, overflow and again zoom. So this is the 3 techniques how we can fix this behavior. Okay, we finished first part of our lecture. If you have any questions about positioning, about floating, you can give me questions. Instead of use float, we can use display flex. Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not sure, I don't remember acceptance criteria of layout creation in your home tasks, but I would say that 90%. Anya, you
Yeah, float
can
and grid
float?
and flags. Oh, flags and grid will be forbidden.
Oh,
Yeah.
so guys, it's that's why I included this topic in our today lecture. So yes, I would say that out of rolling scope, using flex, it's I don't know, 80% of project use it. But you need to understand, you need to train your skills to understand it. Parent collapsing, this behavior of float element when you edit for instance, for paragraph and it take another space and you need to understand it. I understand that it's a bit painful, maybe a bit tricky, but you must try it. But Flex, it's, for instance, Flex or CSS grid, it's completely different philosophy of creation layout. And the Flex, it's a technology for lazy developers, but it's very useful. It's very clear. It's very easy. Okay, about home task, we will talk at the end of our lecture. Okay, similar to, is position fixed similar to absolute relative to body, or body and viewport are different things? Where I want to explain. For instance, for body, you can add margin. And in this case, your body and your viewport take a different space. Body will take another space and the different, it would be this margin. But if you didn't add anything for body, yes, viewport and body, it's the same things. Parent element can change global element. What does it mean? Don't call it lazy. Okay. What do you prefer for your projects? More grid or flex? I would say that both of them, but you need to understand that the main idea of grid, it is global layout. So it's very useful for creation global layout. It's like when you define your header, footer, your site, your main part, and the flex, you use it for small elements like text, like elements inside of, for instance, article or for navigation menu. So I can say that I use Flexbox maybe a bit more rare. Both technology takes the same time for me. Okay, if no more questions, we can continue. And now we are going to talk about semantic. Here's a couple links that you must read about creation semantic layout and understand maybe a bit more clear than my explanation. In a simple words, semantic, it's a set of semantic relationships. But what does it mean? In general case, it means that you should use right, correct text for necessary content. And here is the example, a very useful example. As you can see, here we have the definition, because semantic is a set of blah, 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 blah. It's a definition. We have a definition, we have a word and explanation. And as you remember our previous lecture, I talked about two types of lists. It's unordered and order. Exists one more type of list. It's a definition list. And you should use this list when you want to define definition and explanation of this definition. It's very simple example of semantic, but a bit later I will show you a lot of example to explain you the main idea of this magic word. Okay, yes, as I said, it's semantic. It's a creation HTML document, and they use correct text for correct type of elements. It means that if you have a heading, you should wrap it in a H tag. If you use a paragraph, you should wrap it in a P tag. So you remember it's paragraph. If you have a list, you should use a UL or OL to creation this list. Of course, you can create it. You can create your layout without any semantic text, just span and div. Is it possible? Yes. Is it right? Absolutely not. Okay, we have a couple semantic levels. It's first level, it's very simple. It's using HTML elements. The second, it's naming elements. And the last one, named item combination. What does it mean? Using elements. Again, the same example, it's lists for lists, heading for headings, paragraphs for paragraphs, and forms for forms. Each tag in English, it's very it describe content inside. For you, it's good, but for Russian, it's not always clear. Okay, again, the naming elements. I added a link when you can write information about it, but the main idea it's using the correct naming. For instance, you use special attributes, you use classes, you use, I don't know, what more? IDs, yes, and these should be understandable. It should be understandable for you as for developer and for browser, as for engine machine, for screen readers. And as you remember, again, I explained you that we have two main attributes. It's ID and classes. And I added this slide and added some information about using ID and classes. But the main idea that is classes for CSS and ID for JavaScript. And I count here, marked here, the main difference. It's when you add ID on the page, you should use one time. So for instance, if you create ID text, you add it only, you can apply it only for one element. When you add it for another, you will receive validation error. Why? Because, as I said, ID using for JavaScript. And when you use JavaScript, you need to find element, and the most easiest way to find it, it's find element by ID, because ID it's one element on your page. And in opposite side, classes, you can create class, for instance, text, and you can apply this class for every element that you want. That's why you need to create one class, for instance, with, as I said, as you remember, a clear fix. Very simple example. You create clear fix class with 3 properties, and if you use float for parent, you just add this class. It's very useful and very easy, and And just remember that ID for JavaScript. And semantic for web developers. You, for instance, on this slide, you have two images. Don't concentrate on the content. It's in Russian, doesn't matter. But if you take a look on the left, for this case, we use a table. The table with the different attributes to establish maybe, I don't know, some special styles, but in most cases content is the same. But again, it's maybe two columns, tables which explain your content. Can you understand what kind of content this table has? I suppose it's a bit difficult. It's difficult to understand. What does it mean? Why so many properties and the other? On the right side, we have a definition list. We have a wrapper as a div. We have a explainable heading. It's H1, which contain anchor, the link. And after that, we have definition list. And this definition list contain definition and explanation of definition. And this picture, this code is more clearly, is more understandable for you, for another developers who will be support this code. Because when you write your code, you should remember that you're not the one who works with your code. It can be reviewer, it can be another person who will add maybe another feature, extend your markup, etc. things. And here is a couple pluses why you should use semantic, why it's important. In the first place, it's speed, because when you create semantic construction, I turn back, here it is. When you create semantic construction, you use a minimal set of tags. You don't need to unused wrappers, unused elements. So your code is clear, and if it's clear, it more fast, it works faster, it loads faster, so it's good. Of course, when we add maybe responsive design for our elements, it's easy to understand how to edit for separate section. Also, you should always remember about accessibility, that your page can be used by person without maybe mouse, without keyboards, person who use screen readers for your to understand the content. That because people with some difficulty, there are a lot of people with such issues. When you add some colors, somebody can understand these colors, he can't see your content. There are a bunch of rules for semantic, for accessibility, and semantic and accessibility and validations. It's three definitions that goes very close to each other, that has the connections between each other. And of course, the last, I would say, idea, it's a semantic HTML for machines. Because when you write your semantic code, of course, you show your skills to your maybe teammates, to another person who will work. But the main idea, when you upload your site in a worldwide web, you should understand that it's in most cases it's information, and to show this information correctly to machines, to search engines, to browsers, you should use semantic to define the main parts, the main lists, the main elements, to clarify the information of your web page. And again, a couple useful links about Semantic, and one maybe minor comment. It's about HTML5 Semantic. As you remember, we talked about global text as a header, footer, nav section, and this text is appeared after Google analyzed 1 billion pages. So it means that developers a lot of time create very similar structures. They use a diffs at the beginning. They use a diffs with a class header, footer. After that, Google take this information, analyze this information, aggregate it, and find the common cases. And that's one of the time of the history is that how HTML5 is appeared, why we use this text for particular part of content, for global, for local elements. And here is the simple example of semantically correct HTML5 page. We have a wrapper for body, we have a header. Inside the header we use a nav because it's navigation. Section, inside section, again header, article, header, p. We don't see content, but we understand how that page will looks like on the real screen. If all text will be diffs without classes, just diffs, it's impossible to understand what kind of content inside of div, because div doesn't explain anything. It's just a wrapper. But in this case, we understand everything. We understand that in our site, we have a section. Inside the section, we have a header. And after that, we have a navigation. Again, navigation menu. And I would say that in my point of view, I can split all applying semantic techniques into two parts. It's global and local. Global semantic, it's using global text for positioning special section. And we start with it. We start with a lot of examples. It's examples of sites. I suppose that you know that what W3 school. After that, we will take a look at Code Wars and learn JavaScript. It's a portal that every front-end developer should know. Okay, when we open this page, what we can see? Of course, header. Header, it's very simple. It's a special section on the top. And of course, usually I would say that 60% of headers contain navigation. After that, we can find two aside section. One aside section for navigation, another one for, I don't know, in this case for advertising. And what between one aside section and another one? Of course, main content, content of this page. But inside main, we again can find additional global elements like section, for instance. And inside section, we can find an article because we have a heading, we have a, again, heading with, I don't know, with H2 level, some description of this heading and some information. It's an article. So in main section, we have a section, and inside section, we have an article. At the bottom of the site, we can find a footer. Footer is always at the bottom. And this footer again contain a lot of links. It can be navigation with a list, UL or L, doesn't matter. Next site, code words. Again, take a look, the same structure, header, but in this case, header take a lot of space, but it's, I don't know, I didn't take a look on the structure on the real site. I just created by myself. But header can be this part. But logically, I would say that header can contain navigation and the part with the main image and H1 heading. And of course, navigation, small navigation at the right top corner. The next, what we see on this screen. Of course, a lot of section. Each section contain any separate information. For this case, some information about languages. For this case, it's something about skills. Some information about tasks. And for this screen, it's easy to understand where a section is because each section had the different color. So gray, white, gray, white. That's why 4 sections. And we remember that our sections, it's a main part of the site. That why we can show that this is the site, this is the main part of our page, and we can wrap all sections inside main tag. It's not necessary, but main tag shows to developers, to engine machines, to screen readers that this special section contain the main information on the page. And again, footer at the bottom with the links and copyright. Almost all sites contain such information in the footer. Inner page of code words. Again, what we can find here. First of all, it's a site. At site, it's full this section, but on the top of a site, we can find the links, the list of links. That's why we can wrap this section. I all this element called section because it's separate sections. We can wrap it into a nav tag. What again? Oh, one more site. Why not? It's again, it's a section on the left which contain some information, some filters, some level information, and another additional data. Not main, but just useful information for using. And here we have the main part. I've got the main because here we can find a list of our, in this case, it's tasks, list of tasks. And this is the main information on this page. And each task can be split, for instance, into article, like in this case, or maybe in the section. It depends on situation. Why I choose article? Because in this case, we have a heading, we have some additional information about just additional information and description. So heading, descriptions, that's why I choose article. For me, it's more clear. And the last example, it's learn JavaScript. It exists in English too. And using this book, you will learn JavaScript. Don't concentrate again on the content, just layout. Take a look at this layout. Do you see the familiar things? I suppose yes. First of all, again, header. Header at the top of the screen, on the top of the page, and this header contain navigation, contain logo, contain any information about searching, about logging, and of course, global search. Header, I suppose header. At the bottom, what we can find? We can find the main section and no content here, no aside. It's just full width of the main section. And inside this main section, we can find a separate element and for this element, we can use section to define the separate part of our web page. And of course, at the bottom, footer, like usual. On the inner page, the same situation. In this case, we have a header. Again, this is a header because navigation can't contain, I don't know, just language switcher because it's not now a navigation element. It's just a functionality which can help to switch logo. Is it enough? Not actually. Then information about buying books, about logging, about searching. It's not a header. It's not a navigation. It's a full part of the header. And inside this header, we can define navigation special block. Where is it? Oh, no. Okay, special block only for navigation. List of links. And I suppose that you understand what I mean. Aside. And of course, in this aside, we can add another navigation. I wouldn't say that for this case, we can use nav, but again, it's possible because in each case, these links. But for content at the left, we use aside. Some additional information, not main, just additional for navigation. And the main part which contain the useful content. Inside main part, we can define one section. I turn back. One section which contain, again, some navigation, some information about data. Another section, this section, of course, contain text with some useful information, and we defined it with split section for navigation, for additional information, and section with useful information. And to specify this useful information, we can use article because inside of section is article. Well, it was information about the global semantic text, about the using global semantic text. I hope that it was useful, it was clear for you. So now you can give me questions and we take a small break. Okay, where is the beginning? Wrapper is something that creates container for content. Yes. The div is just a wrapper. Yes. Div doesn't have any logical meaning, any logical stress. It's just a tag. In this tag, you can wrap any content that you want, small piece of content, which, for instance, I don't know, you want to position it, you want to add flags for it, and you need a wrapper. So you can add this wrapper using a div. Yes, div again, it's just a wrapper. And yes, you can use wrapper class for this div, but not for all divs. You can specify your type of div, but in most cases, div and span, they don't mean anything. It's like small elements. That's a B, I hope that you remember. It's a bold and italic type of fonts. Okay. You still use div again, but as I said, HTML5, it brings us a lot of semantic text, and mostly you should use this text. It doesn't mean that div is a bad. It's absolutely good, but you can use it, but only for some, maybe, I don't know, styles purpose. Yes, semantic is it's a best practices. And for your home task, again, please pay attention on this topic and please use the correct global text for global elements. It's a, for instance, like here, it would be very weird if, for instance, for header at the top, you will use footer. Is it possible? Yes. Will validator give you an error? I suppose that no. I never tested. You can try it by yourself, but I suppose that no. But with the logical meaning, it looks strange. It's, for instance, on this picture, we have two sections, aside and main. For both sections, for instance, we can use section, just section tag, section for this and section for this. But when we use aside for the left section, we specify that this type of content is not mean anything. It's just helpful, just maybe some user manipulation. When we add main for this part, we specify that this part is main, and when we add a wrapper as a section, for this we just split our content into separate independent parts. Can any validator validate semantic content? Validator usually check some types of your markup, but not fully, because again, it's difficult to understand semantical clear before you start use it by yourself. You need to understand, you need to test it. Nav only for header, not only nav for navigation. It's navigation tag, so you should use it for navigation. It doesn't mean that nav can be placed only in a header. It can be in aside. It can be in a footer, because it's still main navigation. Okay, let's move to another topic, because we still have a lot of slides. Now I start to speak a bit faster. So now we talk about local semantic. it's a small part. Some of your questions, I didn't reply on some of your questions, because this section explain them. Okay, as I said, we can use only 2 tags. Is it possible? Yes, it is. We can use div for block element, we can use span for inline element, or we can use div for each element on the site, on the web page, and manipulate with the type of element using CSS. You remember that display block, display inline block, and display inline. This is CSS property. But if we use semantic text, it's more clearly because semantic text self-explained. Headings. If you have headings, please use heading, use H1, H6 text for it, because it's heading. It's a small part of the text. Quote, very interesting. Usually people don't, developers don't think that quote is something special, but for quote exist, again, special texts and special constructions to describe it. For instance, take a look on the first example. We have a block of text. We can wrap it in a P. Is it paragraph? Yes, it is. It's a small piece of paragraph. But if after P we add address and specify, for instance, the name of the person who said it, or for another information that describe this paragraph, it will be a quote. It's information about author and some information about what, for instance, what did he say. And another case, quoted after. Again, we can use a Q tag to define a quote, and we can specify an address. In this case, we, I would say, set a connection between Q and between address. In this case, we have separate information about paragraph and separate information about the person who said it. And another case, we set connection between this content. And of course, structure for quote, if it takes a lot of place, it's a block quote. In a block quote, it's very easy to add a P because we have a lot of information, a lot of text, and it's a paragraph. But it's not a simple paragraph. It's a quote. And here is the idea why we use it here. So it's not a paragraph in a simple case. Date or time. Again, special text for time and for date. In one, we can put information about time, or for about date, it doesn't matter. In another case, we can specify what kind of date we have, and using datetime attribute, we describe this date. And here is the result of the first element. It's a data. For another, it's my birthday. But for screen readers, for, again, search engines, this my birthday, it's not a simple, I don't know, heading. It's not a simple paragraph. It's not a simple text. It's a special date. And it means that this information can contain additional data. Text. We talked about this on the previous lecture. And again, we have 4 types of text. We have a bold, italic, typing, deleted text, and we have 8 texts, I would say, to describe the result the same for this text and for this one. But When we use B, I, T, T, and S, we don't put any logical meaning in this text. Just bold, just italic, just delete it. But if we use strong, em, cot, del, in this case, we describe that we want to put a stress on the text inside. In this case, we describe that this tag contain any code, piece of code, and browser and search engine screen readers. Again, browser, search engine, and screen readers. Remember these three words. We'll understand that this is a piece of code. And del, in this case, it's not just the crossed text. In this case, it's old text. It's not a valid text, and we describe and we put a logical meaning for this text. Lists. If you have a list, please use a list. Unordered, ordered, definitions list. When you have definition, when you have description, when you have order, you use this case. When your list doesn't matter, doesn't have order, we use UL. But what about real cases for lists? Take a look on this page where we have list here. Of course, it's simple. First of all, it's navigation. As I said, we wrap our construction into navtag, but inside navtag, we have a list of anchors, a list of links. That's why, for this case, we use UL link construction. Again, I don't know what is it. It's icon with description, but again, it's let's be it benefits, for instance, or features. It's a list of features. Am I right? I guess yes. Again, what we have some kind of, I would say, table, and for this case, maybe in some cases it can be applicable, but again, a list of results. Is it a list? Of course, ULD, use for this construction ULD, because it's a list. Look at this page, what we have here. Here we have navigation, and here we have pictures with some button. But at the same time, we have two lists. Lists of the navigation by groups, I don't know, and a list of our offices. And the last one, footer. On this case, three lists. List for brands, list for additional navigation, and list for social networks. And this is the real cases of applying list. It doesn't mean that list is just text, just, I don't know, front end, back end, and etc. things. It's constructions. The same constructions with more than three, I would say. Images. Very, very interesting topic, because a lot of developers don't pay attention on it. When you add image on the page, you just use tag image. Is it possible? Yes. But in this case, image is just the image. No description, no information. It's just, I would say, just for styles. But if we use fig caption, figure, fig caption, and inside figure we use image. In this case, we put a stress. We set connection that on this page we have image, and this is a text which describe this image. Same situation with the multiple images. 3 images and 1 text which describe these three images. But again, construction, figure, images, and description for these images. And of course, inside fig caption, we can use P to specify text to show that we have a lot of text here. Tables. Tables usually contain data with split into rows and columns. And take a look here. We have a wrapper table. We have a description for table and rows and columns. So for rows, and each rows contain 2 TD, it means that 2 columns. We describe table. Yes, we describe table, but we can specify each section. And for wrapper, after caption, we can add T-head to specify our table, head, T-body to specify the main content, and T-foot. In this case, this section is empty, but for instance, we can contain result about person sum. And this structure is more clear, it's more understandable for you as a developer, more understandable for search engines, and of course for screen readers, because a lot of issues screen readers has with the tables. They start to read like a row 1 column 1 backend, row 1 column 2 7 persons, and people when hear this, it's horrible for them. But in this case, we have another pronunciation for screen readers. Yes, and think twice before you want to use a div, because as I show you, we have a lot of text for global structure and for local elements. Okay, and small break for your questions. I see the last question about the footer is empty. Should we really include it? No, it's not necessary. It's just to show you that tfoot is exist. So in tfoot, you can put any summarizing information. Yes, H1 on the page should be, we should use just once, because in H1 tag, we wrap the main information on the page, and on the page should exist one main heading which describe full the page. Open the landing page. Just buy a watch for, I don't know, $200, or buy a course for something, another one. Landing page, it's a very good example of semantic structures of using, because they use SEO for search engines, and it's in some cases using landing page for learning. It's maybe it will be useful, but not always. Okay, no questions. And for the last sections, it's CSS3 properties. Okay, current standard is CSS3, but before CSS3, as you can see, we have CSS1 and CSS2 and years of appears. At the bottom of the slide, you can see some features of CSS3, and as you can see, we have different years when these features are appeared. When standard became official, it doesn't mean that all features inside this standard will be using. For instance, when HTML5 first version was presented, since, I don't know, maybe a year, 10% of new text was deleted or deprecated. Appears new tag. And for instance, now, yes, current standard for Cascade style sheets, it's version 3, CSS3. But now we already have some information about CSS for instance, variables, and we can use it. And for Chrome, we can apply such structure and it will work. So it means that when standard is released, some features we already have, some features will appear a bit later, and CSS and HTML grows every year. Maybe. Yes, appears new feature every year. And the same situation for JavaScript. We have a new standard that's ES6, now ECMAScript 7, ECMAScript 8, 9, and etc. things. Okay, we start with media queries. Media queries, it's features that help to apply styles partially. For instance, in this case, we have a style background white, and this style will be applied when width of the screen will be more than 600. Such construction we can add in CSS, and the same situation for HTML. We add link to our styles and we add attribute media with the description. So for all devices and orientation landscape. It means that we have two types of orientation. It's like when you rotate your devices. Okay, and here is the bunch. Here is the list of the features which were presented for CSS3. It's a lot of transitions, it's flexbox, self elements, opacity, shadows, and etc., etc., etc. And a couple examples. Let's take a look at the CSS3 properties. But before we start, I should tell you about one thing. It's vendor prefixes. As you remember, topic of the previous lesson, it's the browser wars. It's a topic is actual for now, and we have different browsers. It's a Safari, Chrome, Opera, Internet Explorer, Edge, new version of Edge, and each browser uses its vendor prefix. It means that sometimes some properties of CSS works in a browser only when you use such construction. WebKit for Safari and Chrome, but usually Chrome doesn't need any special vendor prefixes. Moz or Mozilla, it's for Firefox, O for Opera, MC for Internet Explorer and Edge. And you always should remember about browser prefixes. Okay, a couple words about each of new features, and we start with border radius. Almost all slide will contain information about browser supporting, about applying, here is the property, and example. So let's move to the next slide, and here's the border radius. So when we need to such thing, we apply border radius for our element. Again, all these sections, it's a frame, so you can click it and you try it by yourself. Now it's very easy to create such element, but early when we need to do the thing, we need firstly we take image in PNG and put it into our page. So border radius doesn't work, but now it appears and it's very helpful. A lot of properties now make life for front-end developer easy, because maybe 5 years ago to create some some button with gradient, it was it was a big challenge. You can read some article, for instance, button sprites, and read how it was early. Okay, border image. When we want to add any image for a border, we use this property. Here is our construction, and here is the vendor prefixes for WebKit and for Opera. 3 properties. But again, border image and border image is the same. We just add prefix. Here is the result. Here is the original picture, and here is the result of applying. And we can add, for instance, information about repeating, etc. things. Colors exist. I would say 3 types of colors and 1 type of opacity or alpha information. It's again opacity. Here is the plan. First of all, we have a red color, but we use not simple RGB. We use RGB standard. It means that A, it's alpha. It shows the opacity. In this case, opacity 0.8, and it's, I would say, more visible. In the last case, we have opacity 0.2. And here is the result of applying. Also, here you can find some additional information about each property. Don't forget about the links. And opacity. Yes, I already said about it, that the gradation from 0 to 1, and you add it for your elements. But for your information, when you add opacity to your element, content and site, apply this opacity too. So that's why here we can see content almost all. And here we have some hack for Internet Explorer to version 9 and maybe later. From 9 to 10 or 11, I don't remember. But in this case, we can apply filter and alpha. It's just to test. In this case, web prefixes is not working. Gradient background. Now this feature create is very easy. We just use property linear gradient or a bit later radial gradient and define the direction and 2 types of colors. So in this case, we have direction to right and color from red to yellow. It's a very standard syntax. In this case, you can find a lot of examples of different gradients as the result of applying. Also, we can add a % for each color. The final, I would say, % is 100. It's usually from 0 to 100. And another case, it was a linear gradient. Another case, it's a radial gradient. The same structure, but the result a bit difficult, a bit different. Because now our gradient looks like a circle. Shadow. Again, 2 types of shadow. Shadow for text and shadow for box. Here is the example of text shadow. We add property text shadow. We add information about moving shadow to the right, then to the top. And in the end, information about the color. We can add multiple shadow for element. In this case, we have a purple and a red shadows. So 2 shadow for text. And almost the same for elements. Here is the result. Okay. The same for the left to right, top to bottom, and the color. Multiple shadows, etc. And in this case, we can add inset. Inset, that means that the shadow will be inside of element, not outside, inside. Transform. Transformation of element. It's again 2 types. It's 2D and 3D transformation. Let's start from the 2D. Usually we use for these cases translate property. Again, translation from X, from Y, rotation and rotate. And in this case, we specify angle and scale. We specify width and height, final width and height. And skew. Result you can see. It's, I would say it's difficult explanation, but picture describe it. But you should remember that all this property is 2D transformation. 3D transformation. Again, rotate X, rotate Y, rotate Z. And in this case, I would say that when we add a Z property, we have a 3D model. Again, a bit later, I will show this in more clear example. And transition. Transition help you to show your animation more smooth. So in this case, you add some transformation. For instance, div width, base width 100, final width 300, and you specify transition that width will be changed during 2 seconds. Here is the example of, not example, properties which describe transition. It's a linear transition at the same speed from start to the end. It's a ease in, start slowly, accelerate to the end, and again, start faster and slowly to the end. Very interesting topic. It's a cubic Bezier. It's a absolutely separate transformation. In this case, you can use a special curve, special axis to specify your type of animation by yourself. Here is the sandbox where you can test this property. And here is the example. Okay. With transition. Here is transition for width, for height, for transform, and rotation. Okay, and transition can be described by 4 properties. It's what kind of property we apply transition, duration of transition, time function, and delay. Or we can describe it in one line, one by one. Again, for which property, duration, type of transition, and delay, if it needs. Not all this property, for instance, last property doesn't need. And sometimes first property also don't need. We just specify all, and all changes will be applied, because if you change, for instance, width, height, and rotate element, you should specify all case, or you just put all word, and transition will be applied for all changes. And animation. Again, example of animation and special construction. Keyframes. In this case, you describe properties of your element, you specify your animation name, and using keyframes, keywords, and name of animation, you describe it. Inside of curly brackets, you describe animation properties. In our case, it's a background, and you specify from to. Or if you want to do it maybe more custom, you can use %. Again, from 0 to 100. You can specify, I don't know, 10% background red, 50% background yellow, 90% background black, and etc. things. And the last property is duration. It's the duration of your keyframe animation. Yes, and here's the previous explanation. The same situation, but in this case, we use the %. And animation example. Animation works one time, but you can add infinity. In this case, it's a bit later. Here it is, infinity. So this animation will never stop. I just stop it by myself. Okay, also two additional properties for animation direction. We have reverse and alternative. I wouldn't say that it's used very often, but in some cases you can specify when your animation return to the 0 point, I would say so. So we start from the 0 to 100, and in some cases we can specify our animation from 100 to 0 back. The same timing function as for this simple previous animations, transformations, and sorry, and how this timing function works. As you can see, linear, it's linear. It's a linear. This is the fast at the beginning, at the smooth at the end. Is out. Here's the example. And again, short form. Here is the properties we describe animation. It's name, duration, again, timing function. You can use property for each value, or you can write it in one line using only animation property. CSS filters, it's some kind of filters from, I don't know, from Instagram, and it's original, grayscale, sepia, saturate, and you can configure it by yourself, apply for one element, multiple filters. So it's interesting topic, not very, I would say, not very, not always we use it. I would say we very rare use such feature, but anyway, I added a demo so you can try it by yourself. Maybe you can create competitor of Instagram. Yes, and one of the results, for instance, blur, brightness, contrast. So again, just test it by yourself. It's interesting again with animation, with the code. All code is here. And some interesting experiments, because this is the end of our lecture. Here is the links to some interesting 3D elements. For instance, in the first link, you can find 3D room created only by HTML and CSS. So take a look. And also, I would recommend to feel you all the power of CSS3 properties. It's a playlist of CSS inspiration. Here is the link. So using just only HTML and CSS, you can find how you can create a lot of interesting elements. There's just some of examples. So I very recommend you to visit it and to take a look how it's great. And it was the last slide. Almost 2 hours. So now let's questions section. Do you have any questions? Okay, before we waiting, I suppose that Anya, you can say a couple words about home task.